Hello everyone, and we are just about to kick off our second live Q&A from the Fundraising Now studio. And I have with me here today the fabulous Heather Hill, beaming in live from the Big Apple, New York. Hi Heather, how are you?
Oops, sorry, I cut out for a bit. My apologies. Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you. Pardon my technology.
Yes, this Riverside studio tends to use a lot of memory and things. So we have some people in our audience today. Audience members, if you are there, please use the chat. You should have the chat section to kind of ask Heather any questions. We do have some questions here. You should also have the call option, and I think there's would be a little call us in the studio. If you watched the last session with John Lepp, you will know how excited I get when a live call comes in. So I'm going to ask Heather questions that have been, and there's a couple been sent in, and I have some questions for Heather. But jump in and please hit that call button, and I will pause and just to let you know as well, if you are going to call in, you will be on video with me and Heather side by side. If you don't want to be on video, then just put your messages in the chat. Heather, you have a broad range of fundraising. So just before we get into the questions, tell us a bit about what you do and where you work.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in the sector for over 20 years now. And one of the, I would say rare, although hopefully becoming less so, fundraiser that this has been my whole career. So I'd originally gone to university to be a clinical psychologist. But when I went on after I received my bachelor's degree, I was doing graduate studies and took a course in social policy and learned all about the philanthropic sector. And I thought, well, I can do a lot more good there helping people at scale than I can one-on-one as a clinician. So I changed to nonprofit management, and that's where I've been since. So I've done a bit of everything from annual campaigns to major gifts to plan and legacy gifts to grant writing to international work. And that's actually the space that I'm in now, is working in international philanthropy, helping charities receive gifts from donors across borders and finding tax effective ways and regulatory compliance to do that, which is something I absolutely love. Been working internationally since I joined an INGO back in, gosh, it was 2011. So good breadth of experience. I've spoken at many of the different conferences. I think I've spoken on 6 of the 7 continents now. If the penguins want me to come to Antarctica, I'd be happy to do it. But closest I've got were the fairy penguins on Phillip Island. So.
Yes, and the fundraising nest, we lean into our puns heavily, birds of a feather, and the fact that you have awesome blue hair, I mean, like, you are definitely one of our flock, one of my flock, so yes. Okay, let's get into some questions. A reminder to the audience, I can see we've got quite a few in the audience. Call in with your questions at any point and I will interrupt Heather or pop them in the chat. Now, I know you watched Sean Lepp's session last week. We had a bit of a chat before, and one of his these kind of words that jump out to me, and I think it's a good way to start off this session, is around that whole kind of decision science and fundraising. So, and we're going to try and connect this with ethical. So, what are the ethical considerations when using decision science and fundraising? I think you mentioned that some fundraisers feel they can't or shouldn't. So what's your perspective on ethical considerations and decision science?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of background. So it was the very first IFC I attended. I took a master class with Jeff Peters, who is a name some fundraisers might know, but it was all about behavioral science, behavioral economics, decision science, all the different things we call it. But essentially, how and why do people make the decisions they do? And specifically, how do they make their philanthropic decisions? And really got into a lot of the way the brain functions. If you ask me a book every fundraiser should read, it's Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Yes, it will blow your mind.
Yes. You look at everything differently after that.
Your whole life is just a lie. Like been trained to think that the things that you don't think.
Yes. And that's exactly right. It's we like to think that we are very rational, measured, conscientious decision makers, but we're really not. We're really kind of operating out of that instinctual lizard brain far more than we would like
Yeah.
to acknowledge. And that's true with our philanthropic giving as well. People tend to make those decisions out of kind of the fast acting part of the brain, and when you load things up too much with statistics, with a lot of figures, with very sterile kind of content, kind of pull people out of that heart space where they would generally make their philanthropic gifts, and you actually suppress giving. So I think I would flip this around as far as how I think about the ethics of behavioral economics and decision science and fundraising, is that, are you performing unethically if you are keeping those barriers into giving and not trying to optimize the response from your donors? I think one of the concerns fundraisers often raise is that they feel it's being manipulative, that it's and trickery, for lack of a better word, to use decision science. But it's really not. And the thing is, John talked about, which is something I worked in direct response firms, using a closed-faced envelope with a, first-class postage stamp on it and, handwritten font, which increases open rates on direct response and increases giving. People wouldn't necessarily think there's any ethical issue with that. They wouldn't have qualms about, oh, well, that makes good sense. I'll do that. Yeah. But when you talk about, instead of using statistics to talk about the work that you do, and trying to educate people, telling the stories of your beneficiaries instead, that's like, whoa, that's being manipulative. It's like, no, that's helping the donor connect on a person to person or from their heart space with the mission. Why would you not want them to do that?
Yeah. I think every decision, we live in we're a consumer-based society, and how you spend your money, or give your money, is based on decisions. So that's what that, thinking fast and slow helped me realize was, yes, there is a whole psychological decision science base here that we have to tap into.
Yes, absolutely. And the concerns about, well, businesses do this all the time. And sometimes the pushback on that is, well, charity should be held at a higher standard. It's like, well, let's flip that around. So you mean that businesses and corporations should be held to a lower standard? Let's think about what we're saying here.
Yeah.
And there's a great book called Nudge, that was written by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. It talks about using decision science in a lot of different contexts, including business and including in the charity space. And, banking and finance institutions have used it as a way to incentivize people to actually have savings in their account so that they're more prepared, in case of a financial crisis or emergency. Something comes up that they weren't expecting, they actually have resources saved, or saving for retirement. Healthcare organizations use it to help people come in for annual checks and follow through on treatment plans and things.
Yeah.
Would you argue that those are unethical in trying to, motivate that behavior? So, and the other thing that makes me laugh is, I shouldn't say makes me laugh, but it just kind of gives me pause, is when you talk about astrings on direct response, there's an anchoring effect. If you put the amount that you want the donor to give first, that has the anchoring effect. You're more likely to get that amount versus having things in ascending or descending order. And I've heard pushback on that. That's like, well, no, the donor should be free to choose. We shouldn't be pushing a desired amount on them. Well, the alternative is to just not put any amount and leave it as a free space. So again, is that being ethical and not asking for what the organization needs, that your beneficiaries need?
Yeah.
And the other side of that is, well, next time you go into a restaurant and you're looking at the menu and they've got items at the top that are boxed, drawing your eye to it and drawing attention to it, and you order that was there because that's their highest profit margin item.
Yeah.
So
I love it. I love that analogy. It's so true. And the anchoring effect was actually yeah, it is. It's proven to deliver results. I absolutely love it. Remember, audience, please call in, hit that green button, and we would love you to ask Heather a question directly on any of the questions or subjects that we are talking about, or pop it in the chat box. Heather is braced and waiting. She did say, hit me with your questions. So please
Yes.
ask her a question, challenge anything or support anything. Okay,
Yes,
so
and just
moving on. Yeah.
sorry, one other little point on that with the ethics. I would say ethical considerations on why you shouldn't be doing something using decision
Yeah.
science. I mentioned story. Don't fabricate a story.
Yeah.
It's one thing to anonymize a story or use real life examples, but characterize it into a story form. But make sure they're actual stories that your beneficiaries have experienced, and that you're not.
Yes.
So kind of that. It's like just be honest about how you're using it, and I
As,
think that's kind of the key point there.
as Kim Burnett says, the truth told well.
Yes.
Okay, I want to move on to a subject that is pretty close to that I don't think is spoken about enough either in the sector, and I think you agree with me here too. Is donor dominance. It's a meaty topic, and I think particularly in a changing society today. I think we'll start off with a kind of slightly easier one. But how should fundraisers and organisations handle deciding whether to accept gifts with society's kind of changing expectations?
Yeah, I think that is a tricky one. I think the first consideration is kind of looking at it from a rights balancing perspective. What are the rights of the donor versus what are the rights of your beneficiary, and how are you mediating that? And when a donor is putting conditions on a gift or has expectations of what their influence or involvement is going to be because they're making this gift, what's the impact of that on your beneficiaries? And is it actually doing harm and honoring these? And of course, the other larger question is this donor and accepting this gift going to be in line with your organizational mission? So
Yeah.
is there a conflict there? Because that's a huge consideration. And they say,
And then
well,
your own personal moral confliction, does that align with the organization's morals?
yes, yes. Is this a figure that you would be comfortable representing your organization? Because in effect, if some of these donors are known in the world, and people know that they're giving to you, are people going to say, "Oh, that seems odd"? And if they are, maybe you should be asking that question before that's happened, and thinking, well, would that seem odd to someone? And am I comfortable with that as a fundraiser? I think that kind of you are the first line as the fundraiser to really be asking those questions and weighing out that rights balancing perspective.
And should all organisations have a gift acceptance policy? Because fundraisers will be looking for that lead, that kind of parameters from there. I've worked in many organisations, and to be honest, I don't think I've ever. Well, there would have been one potentially, but I've not, seen a gift acceptance policy. I've seen less than I've seen more of. Put it that way.
Yes, I would advocate for every charity, every organization having a gift acceptance policy. It doesn't have to be super detailed. You don't have to try to account for every possibility you've got. But I think some general guidelines, both in the types of gifts that you would take. For example, there are donors who will make donations with cryptocurrency now. Is your organization comfortable receiving that? And for a number of reasons, you may not be. So having some parameters on the types of gifts that you're willing to accept. But I think also having things in about mission alignment is important as well, just to have those protections in place, because you just don't know until you're in the situation, and having to make a snap decision. There are a lot of issues with that. First, that it can lead to inconsistency as people change in the different roles, and one person said this was fine and the next person doesn't, and donor community, if they're peers, they're going to talk to each other. So then it's like, well, why did you take his gift and not mine? Why
Yeah.
was her gift okay and you won't accept this? So I think just for consistency, but I think also to protect the integrity of the organization and to have something to point back to if there's ever a question about why you aren't accepting something. It's like, no, we clearly state in our policy that we will do this and we won't do that.
Yeah, and how far do we go there? And like, do donors have an obligation? You know, if they're big investors and they've got a lot of, shares and investments, and that's potentially where some of their ability to be philanthropic comes from, especially when we're talking about large donors. Do they have an obligation to share with organisations, for example, where their investment portfolio sits and what kind of yeah, where they're making their money from?
I mean, they don't have an obligation to, but as a fundraiser, you might have an obligation to ask about that if you know the donor is intending to give shares. And particularly if you have something in your gift acceptance policy that would say, we won't accept shares of this, to just say, look, we're very grateful that you're interested in supporting our mission. I just want to have an open conversation about this with you,
Yeah.
just so that we're being transparent and we don't find ourselves in an awkward situation. Again, that's why the gift acceptance policy helps, is because you can use that. It's not a personal thing coming from you, the
Yeah.
fundraiser. It's I want to adhere to our policy and be transparent and open and talk about this freely with you.
Yeah, and so for organizations that might not have one, or are this is the kind of things that we want to, practical tools. Like, where do is there templates of these? Do people share them? Is this something you can reach out to peers in the sector and say, can I have a look at your gift acceptance policy? I mean, is this a secret thing, or is this something that we should be sharing?
No, it's there's a lot of great templates out there. I think starting with peers, particularly if you have peers who work for a similar organization to you, because they'll be a little bit more aligned, perhaps, in
Yeah.
what some of the caveats are in the policy. But there are a lot of great general templates out there as well. And again, you can tailor that to what's appropriate for your mission, for your organization, and for your beneficiaries as to what's going to keep things at the highest standard of integrity for
Yeah.
you, for your donors, for the organization.
Absolutely. Just another reminder, please call in with any questions that you might have for Heather. Just hit the button, or we have a question here from Kaz. So where could Kaz find those templates?
There's some great ones available online. You could try places like Sophie might have some, actually, as I'm thinking about it. But a lot of the fundraising associations have them. There's also some kind of
I wonder if CFRE might have some resources there.
I don't know if CFRE does or not, but I know FIA might.
Yep.
I don't know if Fins would or not. And I mean, Kaz, you're also welcome to reach out to me directly, and I can help find some for you as well. I don't want to just set you loose on a Google search and have you feel lost, but there are a lot of great sites out there.
Fabulous. What we might do, I might have a catch up with Heather, and we might put the best of what ones we find and drop them into our toolkit and templates section on the community hub. That's a great idea. Kaz, thank you for popping that question into the chat. If you've got any other questions coming out there, Heather she can talk about, it's donor dominance, and we're actually going to talk about yoga and Star Wars, all sorts of things, and hairless cat. So, as someone who's been moving, actually, I'm going to stick to the donor dominance issue for and then we can move on to a bit more of a light-hearted subject. So, I guess it's just about, you've maybe covered some of it, but sharing insights into how fundraisers can deal with donors who want to have a lot of control, and how to keep things good with that level of control. I know personally I had an experience where just one sentence was said to me in a tone and in a way that made me end the relationship with a family that are potentially almost billionaires, because of it was so uncomfortable, you know, a suggestion that I could be given as much money as I wanted if I did what they wanted me to. That does, you know, it doesn't work.
No, I think it's been interesting. I feel like we're seeing a lot more of this now. I started in researching donor dominance, gosh, I want to say back in 2018, 2019, including doing a survey of fundraisers in different countries. And I mean, the survey, 14 different countries. There were
Wow.
fundraisers in 14 different countries all saying that they've experienced this in their fundraising work and in their organizations. Um, and the really frustrating thing is a lot of times that they, you know, tried to speak to leadership, tried to speak to line managers or whoever about it. It was just kind of like, well, just deal with it,
Yeah.
essentially. Or the donor would get reassigned to a different fundraiser and then it became someone else's problem, but it didn't solve the problem. It just moved it around,
No, it
shuffling the
didn't.
pieces on the board, essentially.
Yeah, you know, we generosity and philanthropy and fundraising is what we exist to do. You know, we're facilitating that, and when you know the reasons for a philanthropic gift are not motivated by the generosity and philanthropy we want, but when it's motivated by huge ego and business driven based, you know, they want to make more money and they want to fulfill their ego in some way. It's a really challenging one as a fundraiser who's put in that position, and but yet your leadership are saying, well, if they want to give, you know, it's money, and it's I don't. I disagree. You know, I think we do what we do for the reasons that we do.
Yes, well, and that's just it. It's there are so many forms of donor dominance and emerge, and some of it's that they want to have control and influence over the organization. Some of it's that they want kickbacks, you know, whether that's tickets to events or, you know, special treatment on things, and in some cases, just really awful behavior and how they interact with fundraisers of all genders.
Yeah.
It's very disturbing. Anyway, how do you deal with this as a fundraiser? I guess is getting back to what the actual question
Yeah.
was. And I think I don't know, more and more like people talk about the donor bill of rights and the rights that donors are entitled to and things, but and there's been some talk about a fundraiser bill of rights, but donors aren't going to know about that, nor are they going to care unless you, when you're meeting with them, here's the bill of rights and how I'm to be treated.
Yeah.
But I think you know, having some kind of policy in the organization, or, you know, one thing that we talked about, I just worked on a large project with Rogari about gender issues and fundraising, not about genders of donors, but genders of fundraisers and how we're treated. And one thing we proposed in that is to mitigate some of the behavior was a donor code of conduct.
Yes.
Which was
Absolutely.
interesting. Some people were, you know, very enthusiastic about it. Other people like, I would never dare put that in front of a donor. How offended would they be? And I thought, if that donor truly cares about your organization, they're not going to be offended, because you can just explain, this is something we just want all of our donors to be aware of, and we would ask you to sign. We don't. You can even say that, like, I know that most of this would never apply to you, but it's just something that we'd like to have in place just to set some clear parameters around your expectations in making the gift, as well as our expectations when we're receiving this
Yeah.
gift.
Yeah, I've always said, you know, the peak bodies for fundraising are there to provide ethical standards and code of conduct for fundraisers, for people asking the money, but your philanthropy peak bodies don't have a code of conduct for the people giving the money. And I always find that just an imbalance of power from the very beginning.
Absolutely, and that's exactly where gender dominance stems from, is the inherent imbalance of power in those relationships because of how we're currently structured in these fundraising models. And then you've got, you know, some organizations, there's almost like an unspoken thing that donors over a certain amount are going to get a seat on the board, which just exacerbates the issue, because then you've got someone who's a major donor and a board member So you feel very helpless and sometimes as a fundraiser to push back or say no. And, then you've got the organization, and it's very sad in our sector, but a lot of organizations operate from a scarcity mentality where it's like, I don't want to say no to this gift because it's going to go somewhere else and then we're not going to have it. And where else are we going to get that, those funds from? And I think having the courage to be able to say no, if, whether it's no because it compromises the organization or no because it's compromising your fundraisers to be working with some of those individuals. It starts with, growing awareness within the organizations and speaking about it. It also helps if the peak bodies, the fundraising associations start to talk about this more and raise awareness and help equip and empower fundraisers to advocate for this. And I think it's a subject that people really don't want to touch with, a 10-meter pole. It's just
absolutely
biting the hand that feeds you, so to speak. But it's like, it's not. It might be feeding you, but it's also poisoning you. It's a toxic environment to work in when that kind of donor behavior and donor dominance is allowed to just prevail.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest motivation for building the fundraising nest was to look after if we looked after fundraisers the way we know to look after donors, I believe the sector would be so much happier, healthier, and more fruitful for everyone. And I think it's about time that the fundraisers were given that kind of aroha, that love that and respect and support that they need. Absolutely. I'm incredibly passionate about it. Thank you, Heather. Again, please call in with your questions or your thoughts. You don't have to have a question. Support what we're saying, disagree with what we're saying. We would love to hear from you. Just hit that green phone button and I will accept your call. I can see there's more people in the audience now. Also pop your questions into the chat. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts on donor dominance and protecting and looking after fundraisers? Okay, international fundraising. It's something I am very limited in my knowledge about, and it fascinates me. International fundraising is, there must be so many complex tax issues. So I have a question here saying, what common problems do fundraisers face when working on fundraising projects in different countries, and how do they overcome those problems?
Yes, and to give a little context from who I'm speaking, so my role right now is head of international philanthropy for Chapel New York, and that's all that Chapel New York does is help with international philanthropy and fundraising. So this is the water that I swim in daily. I would say one of the biggest barriers is time, because generally, if you're a fundraiser, the international bit is just kind of tacked on to everything else you're doing.
Yeah,
and it's far more complicated than what you're doing domestically. So finding the time to actually understand all the different legal and regulatory bits, to understand how it all works can be a huge challenge. And I think, getting into that, the legal and regulatory, every country is different. There might be similarities, but they've all got their own regulatory bodies. They've all got their own laws about things. And it's figuring out what is the solution? How can I, and especially knowing that donors also generally want to have a tax benefit when they're giving. Not that that's their motivation for giving, but for major gifts in particular, if the donor is going to choose to give that to you, they'd like to be able to get a tax benefit on it. It's an added benefit to what they were hoping to do philanthropically. So I think figuring out what is the vehicle in which I can offer tax benefits and receive this gift. And there's generally two options. You can set up a separate legal entity in that country, which is a solution. It's expensive, both in your time and the actual financial cost. And you've got to have someone who's constantly monitoring the legal and regulatory environment in that country to make sure you're keeping up with everything that's required of you. If you're planning on being there, working in that country for a long time, you're going to have donors there for years to come. You plan on having a physical presence there where you're going to be visiting regularly. then it might be the right solution for you because you're doing more investment in that country. The other option, which is a lot easier and a lot less taxing on you as the fundraiser and the organization, is to work with an intermediary. So working with an intermediary who's registered in that country where your donors are, who can receive the gifts on your behalf and then go through a process to grant them to you, where that organization is handling all the legal regulatory bits. They're handling all the administrative bits like banking, receiving post donation processing, all those little things that you don't even think of because it just comes naturally when you're doing it at your home office. But thinking about, oh, well, how's that going to happen in another country when no one's there to do it? So
Yeah.
Again, having a partner who can help with all that is a great solution. It's far less costly and far less of a mental burden than trying to stay on top of all these changing things. In particular, the US and the UK can be very complicated as far as what the regulatory bodies will and won't allow and what charities can do or not do. So if you've got your own entity in either of those places, it can be a lot to keep up with. And then, same thing with Hong Kong, some things are changing there. EU, every country is different in the EU, just like every state in the US is different. And then you've got in the US, you've got the federal on top of it. So the countrywide regs, my advice is always, if you can find a partner, find a partner. Don't try to go it on your own.
Can you find, what if you have someone who, I guess has moved overseas and they want to give just one big gift? Can you use these partner intermediary services just for one gift? The one big gift, and it doesn't have to be a lot of gifts.
Yes, and actually that's the ideal time or an ideal situation to find an intermediary. Not all of them will do it. I'm not trying to plug Chapel New York, but I will say that's something that we do because we know that comes up. And there are others who will do that as well. But just kind of, if you've got that one off, to be able to find that kind of solution is very helpful. And again, it's good for the donor, it's good for you. And it's just so much more efficient than imagine if I have this one big gift I want. I'm like, we'll hold that for like the next six to 9 months, maybe a year while we get this other entity set up. And then we'll close it down after we receive the gift.
Yes, very.
There are helping organizations out there that can make that a lot easier.
Absolutely. I mean, people are moving all over the world, and I think organizations do need to look at their potential, prospects and consider if they're overseas, that's not a barrier at all, especially with the way that we can send kind of communications electronically, that we can actually re-engage our people that may have moved overseas.
Absolutely. And I think in the last, 3.5 years or so, I mean, basically going back to following the pandemic, there's a lot more global sensibility among donors. I think that was we had this global shared experience, and I think it helped people really become a bit more in tune with the fact that like, oh, other countries are having challenges with this as well. So there was this kind of a better global awareness. But then I think also, particularly for universities who had alumni who've moved elsewhere, just really wanting to have that sense of connection back after being isolated. It's like, I want to reconnect with some of these things, or, not even universities who have alumni, but just, again, people who've just moved to other places in the world, but want to have that connection back to home, or even if it was just home for a few years, someplace that they deeply cared about, and they want to find a way to support that community. And
Absolutely.
with it really helped accelerate, I think, the acceptance of tech in fundraising. I think there was a lot of pushback and resistance. And, in some cases it was coming from the fundraisers as well. Like, no, I want to sit down with someone. I want to have a conversation. But there's so much now you can do with, with Zoom and Teams and all the different video conferencing platforms, as well as, electronic communications, whether that's on social media, whether that's, emails or other things. That's a fine way to communicate now. No one's going to look down on that. And it's it makes international fundraising a lot more cost effective.
Yeah, I love it. So Chanel has jumped in and said she missed the first part and hadn't heard the term donor dominance. Chanel, you missed a very interesting conversation there, and it was about the power dynamics between. We were discussing how fundraising has, a code of conduct and held to ethical standards, but in the philanthropy side, there is no code of conduct. So those asking for the money are held to a code of conduct and ethical standards, but those giving the money, there's not much in that space at the moment, and that was the kind of the last conversation. Prior to that, it was more about donors wanting control and giving being generous for the wrong reasons and how uncomfortable it is. And Heather did a survey back in 2018 that highlighted in 14 different countries fundraisers had been put in uncomfortable situations by donors asserting their dominance in a way that wasn't I guess, comfortable. And so we want to have those conversations much more and make sure fundraisers feel protected as well. So yes, the power and imbalance. It's terrible, but Donald Trump is the person that just popped to mind. Bad behavior. I love that, Chanel. That's a whole other, that could be a whole other event in itself.
Yes.
Thanks again. Keep putting your questions in the chat, and please give us a call if you are there. I know it's Easter weekend and people are busy, but do give us a call. It'd be great to have a live call from Heather. Heather, moving on to, oh, we have a call. We have a call.
Hey, Michelle. Hello, Heather.
Hey. Hello, how are you?
Good. Thanks. Really fascinating conversation, Heather. And I want to, if I can, jump back to the start of the conversation where you spoke about the importance of, telling the stories rather than the facts, and how that's going to work with donors in influencing, encouraging, motivating them to donate. As a fundraising communicator of many years, and FIA and CFRE, always top of mind for me is, ethics and fundraising. I've had a couple of instances over the years where I've had organisations, for example, we're writing up an appeal and they deal in a really, really sensitive area, domestic violence, childhood sexual abuse, all of those things where we all have to be hypersensitive to the people there, and where they often, either the frontline caseworkers simply refuse to reach out for anyone to share their story with, and I understand why, or where they don't want to share it. I've had the other experience where I've been able to speak with people at the front line so they can talk to me about the people that they're working with. We know ways to, of course, anonymise it and so forth. I've had two situations that I can think of in recent years where it's been a flat from the organisation: you will not get access to an actual story because we are terrified that somebody will recognise themselves. So what I've done in both instances, I have had some previous, I would call them kind of case studies, and I've worked with both the fundraiser and through the social workers. Okay, I'm going to develop a hybrid story of what would be a typical, not typical, none of it's typical and it's all awful, but what may be a genuine beneficiary of your work. And then I'll run it through them. So I've also included in it a disclaimer, as we do the usual ones. Names have been changed, but in both of those cases, I think we added something like, and some of the details changed, so, to protect the identity. How do you feel about that, a hybrid case study? Because I struggled a little bit because I know I wasn't making it up. I know it was authentic in terms of the kind of work they do, but I'd be interested to hear what you think about that.
I think that's a fully appropriate and ethical solution. Again, if it's reflective of what the organization is actually seeing and the people that it's caring for. Again, I think the disclaimer is a great safeguard on that as well, to just say some details have been changed to protect the identity of the person. But again, it's telling real things that beneficiaries have been experiencing, and why it's so important that the donor give to help create change. So this doesn't happen, again. I think when I was working in direct response, I had a client who was working with, they were trying to both work with survivors of child abuse and also be advocating for protections against child abuse, trying to end it. And some of that included working with children in foster care, and ran into a similar thing where, no one actually wanted to give a full profile on one of the children, but they would share pieces. So again, it was taking those pieces and creating the narrative, vetting it with the organization, getting their blessing on it. Are you comfortable that this is representative of types of cases that you're seeing? And then having the disclaimer, because again, it's not that you're just completely fabricating something out of nowhere. And a program officer will look at that and say, we've never seen that in our history.
And
but
that was
using
my point
actual...
when I was, my point to the organisation, and I got a lot of pushback to it, and it was because all they gave me in the brief was statistics and more darn statistics and sterile things about, the X number of people being abused. And just having that conversation at that level, there was that fear in the organisation, but no, that's not an exact story. So no, you've reinforced what I hoped you would for me, because I did have that ethical argument in my own mind, and I just felt, look, I'm not doing the right thing by the organisation nor the donors. What's the impact of their support? That's the stories, the real human stories.
Absolutely. And
thank you for ringing in with your question. I think it's a really valid one, and thank you for being honest about the situations that we are faced with, and absolutely in context. But and I think it's super important that we are considering what's ethical and what's not. I love it. Thank you for ringing in, Terry, and thank you for replying, Heather. Thank you.
Yes.
Now, can I remember how to hang our collars up? Terry might be able to hang herself up. I'm just looking at this. Here we go. Thank you, Terry, for calling in. And now we'll move on a little bit before we wrap this up to looking at fundraisers. And, you are a huge advocate of people trying to their personal identity within fundraising. And what are... I'm looking at the questions here, sorry. Here we go. As someone who's been in fundraising for a long time, what advice would you give to someone trying to find their own style and way of doing things in fundraising?
Yes. Well, I think just think about the reasons of why you've gotten into fundraising. What do you truly care about? What's your passion, and what are your values? And letting that drive the career decisions that you're making. Don't work someplace where you're not comfortable with what you're raising funds for, for one. But I think really in finding your voice, I think one of the biggest challenges I think we have in the fundraising profession is the way it's perceived, both in the sector and outside of it as well. And I've seen, I was telling you this in correspondence, Michelle, I've seen people tie themselves up into knots and coming up with titles or way to describe their work that don't use the word fundraising or fundraiser in it, because the fear of the negative perception. And then there, coupled with that, you have people who have the perception, and sadly, in some cases, it's leadership in the organizations, of anybody can be a fundraiser. You just have to have people skills, or you just have to be comfortable with the cause, or maybe you've done sales, but there's no particular knowledge set or skill set that you need. Anybody can do it. Really. So I think being able to push back on that as a fundraiser is the kind of the first step in finding your voice. I saw this really upsetting post on LinkedIn maybe about a month ago, where someone had written up a thing and they had two columns, and one said fundraising and the other column had philanthropic dialogue specialist or something, some kind of very flowery title. And essentially what they had in the fundraiser column was, terrible practices, being very transactional, not listening to donors, pushing for a gift rather than letting the donor set their own pace. And then the other one was basically listed all best practices in fundraising. And I'm looking at something, these are both fundraising. These both of these are fundraisers. Someone's using best practice, someone's not. But just because there are fundraisers who don't do these things doesn't mean that all fundraisers are bad fundraisers. And
Absolutely.
it was absolutely maddening. So,
I
and
mean,
that's where
rather
I
than,
think,
yeah,
go ahead.
so it, it's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about it before, but you're right. The word fundraising makes people uncomfortable. But actually, maybe it's our, and instead of trying to, make an excuse or hide or be ashamed of our title of fundraiser, actually it's flipping the switch and going, what people believe fundraising is or has been to this point, we need to tell a different story of what fundraisers are and be empowered by the word that we're a fundraiser instead of trying to create these crazy, alternative words to deceive donors on what we're doing.
Right, or to make other people more comfortable in the organization, because in some cases it'll be the program officers don't want to think about people fundraising for their work, that this is this ignoble activity. No, it's like it's the fundraising that makes the work that you're doing possible, and kind of helping foster the understanding. So I think one of the best things we can do as fundraisers is we've all got that light inside of us that drew us to our work. That's what we care about, and to let that just blaze and burn down all these misperceptions about what fundraising is, and show people through that blazing light what it actually is and how powerful it can be and how critical it is for good work to happen, for change to actually occur in the world, for society to get better. Resources are needed for that to happen, and someone's got to be that conduit, that person who's connecting the people who care and want to do good with the organizations who are trying to put that in place. That's fundraising. That's fundraising at its core. That's changing the world.
And fundraising is not about the money, so don't focus on the money. It's about one person having a conversation with another person, and I am quoting Ken Burnett again because it's too good, about the impact or a cause that they care about. It is that facilitator of what the impact that someone wants to see in the world and the change that you can help make happen for them. It's real simple, but I think that's a message we've got to keep reinforcing and reinforcing. And I think we do see a change in that, but I think there's still a long way to go for sure.
Yes, I think it comes with believing in the work that you're doing, being excited about it, and not shying away from talking about it. But I think the other thing is also kind of setting your values and setting your boundaries about what you are and aren't willing to do as a fundraiser, so that whatever role you're in, you feel good, that you're being honest with yourself, you're being honest with your donors, you're able to, support the beneficiaries that your organization's serving, whether that's people, whether that's animals, whether that's creating a space for the public to come and enjoy, whatever that might be. But what kind of places are you willing to work and what aren't you? And being okay with saying no to things and really following your passions. And I think the other bit as well is professional development, and always being eager to learn, always being curious, asking why did that work? Why did that not work? Why did this work better than that did, even though they both got results? A/B testing things, hearing, going to a lecture, joining a webinar, coming to this Q&A and asking me things, whatever that might be. But being okay with not knowing everything and being open to learning new things, and just kind of understanding that we live and work in a constantly shifting environment. That's just life. It's being human, and that we need to continue on our journey on learning and growing. And I think the more fundraisers can value that knowledge and that ongoing education just as part of the role, whether it doesn't have to be higher education, it can be, again, coming to a webinar, coming to a Q&A, but kind of digging into that space of like, yes, there is knowledge and there are skills that we should have, and I want to have those.
And also it's the thought leadership piece, because what I was just thinking about the fundraiser there who's really not comfortable with some of the decisions that are being made because of what they know around donors, and because they watch things like this, or they're educated. But they also know, if you don't educate yourself or delve into that thought leadership and understand, when instinctually decisions are made within your organization and you have to say, no, I don't want to do this for these reasons, your leaders are going to need evidence. They're going to need some kind of reason that, rarely are they going to just go, okay, because you don't want to, Michelle, that's great, we won't do that. So you need to actually, have the knowledge, and find or be able to find the evidence, or point the leaders into the direction on why you believe that there's better ways of doing what they're doing. And you don't know that without the knowledge.
Right. I mean, we've talked about using story in fundraising a few times, but
Yeah.
when you've got someone who's saying, no, we need to be educating our donors, we need to be giving them the facts and statistics so they understand how serious the problem is, to have had the experience of like, no, there's this research, this is, from multiple sources that I'll bet that story actually performs better in fundraising. Again, your instinct is, oh no, it's a hard thing people give to people. But being able to, as you said, have delved into the thought leadership to be able to show, yes, and here's the evidence.
Yes, because bosses, leaders like they like the research and they like the evidence. And so I think that's how you can empower yourself. If you're sitting, if you're listening or watching this later, if you're sitting going, well, yeah, that's great, but I can't do that in my organization. It's so big and it's so vast, nobody would listen to me. Actually, with the right, you will get someone's attention with the right information that you need to in the right way. Well, I believe so anyway. And I think that's what I want to collaborate, is bring all the information to a place where fundraisers can actually step out and be empowered to do that.
Yes, and the secondary part of that as well is, and if you're in an organization where you've absolutely tried everyone, no one's listening, then that's an organization that doesn't value its fundraising and probably not a good environment for you to be in. And sometimes leaning into your professional identity is having that awareness and being able to move to someplace that is in line with your values and values you.
100%. I absolutely love it. Now we've been talking for quite a while. Is there any last phone calls? Would anyone like to phone in with a phone call for Heather? Please phone in again, just to share if you agree with us, or you disagree, or any questions, or pop it into the chat. I've got a couple of last questions for Heather. Heather, what's it like to own a cat with no hair?
It's imagine having a pet that's a combination cat, dog, monkey, and small human. So I have a hairless cat. He's over here licking his foot as I'm speaking. This is Osiris. No.
Amazing.
And he's just been sitting here staring the whole time we've been on the call. But that's the thing. He's the most personable, friendly cat I've ever owned or never ever met. I would say he's very curious about people. He always wants to be close. He's like a dog in that he comes and greets me at the door if I've been away. Yeah. Follow me around. He's like, I say he's like a little monkey, because without having the fur on the feet, they've got thicker pads, and he doesn't have thumbs, but he really makes it seem like he does sometimes. He will try to grab things with the paws and just gets into all kinds of mischief. He still does the cat things, like testing for gravity, like, oh, if I knock this over, will it fall down?
Awesome. And I know that we've both got a shared love of Star Wars, and it's no secret that I am a patched member of the 501st, which I know you are a huge fan of as well. And the 501st, so final question to wrap up today. Do you know the story behind the pink droid that briefly appears in each of the Star Wars movie and its relation to the charity sector?
Yes. So that is R2KT, named after Katie, who is the daughter of the founder of the 501st. who was very ill. I think she was 7 years old or so. And as she was undergoing treatment, things said, I wish I had a droid like R2 to watch over me.
Yeah.
And I know that 501st actually came together and built her.
Yeah.
This pink and white droid, which became R2KT. And there were funds raised for her. It was a very big charity initiative. And what I think is really interesting is that, I mean, it spread. The 501st is global. They're everywhere.
I'm a member of Outpost 42, which is the degree of New Zealand. So I'm an honorary member of Outpost 42.
It is on my bucket list to one day be a member, honorary or otherwise, of one of the outposts.
Member, yeah.
But George Lucas was touring around and met with the outpost in Japan and told them the story about Katie, and he wrote a thing for her. And then Dave Filoni, who did, sorry, I'm a big Star Wars nerd, who did the Clone Wars, which was the animated series, because he has so much respect for the 501st, like wrote R2KT into the Clone Wars series as well. She's got some appearances, but the 501st is an immensely charitable group, with R2KT just being one example of the great work they do.
Yeah, they do. And that's why I'm an honorary member. I have worked with them on so many occasions, and they're so responsive. I even brought them to a conference that I have done. They will come to any and support any charitable kind of, particularly childhood cancer is the cause that it was set up for. But they're a brilliant bunch of humans, and I just love to see, they are the most proud fundraisers you'll ever meet in a whole different, capacity. So I just love when you're exposed to the real good human stories that are actually huge, but behind the big Star Wars is the biggest movies ever. But yeah, it's so special in our sector too. So I love that we can bring that passion together for the Star Wars. I know
Yes.
you've got your own helmet too, but it's maybe
I have the whole thing. The helmet's easier to pop on the call.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Everyone says thank you for the chat. Thank you for joining us, everyone, today. We will follow up on those templates for gift acceptance. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's been great having you in the audience. Have a wonderful Easter, everyone. And thank you, Kaz. And thank you, Chanel and Heather. Huge thank you to you for joining us today with our live Q&A. And everyone is just saying goodbye to us in the chat now. We'll put this up to share with everyone. And thank you again. Kakite and goodbye from Australia and New York.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Bye.